People who work in human resources, what is the weirdest shit you have seen? The maintenance guy had been living up above the ceiling of the building. He had built a little cubby living area with electricity and a small fridge and everything. Edit. 4 years. Hey, that happened at the university where I used to work. Guy had had a nasty divorce and set up a cot in the basement under the structures lab. Dunno how he tolerated that. It was loud from bigger hydraulic pumps running all the time, and probably averaged about 35 C. Plus, the ceiling was about 1.5 meters high, the floor was covered in grime and oil, and the place stank. He was gone before I started, but I heard he'd been living there for a few months before getting caught. I used to work in hours at a large corporation. There was a big hours back office team doing a lot of processing and data entry, including employees' bank info for their salary. It just so happened that on the same day 2 employees with the same name started, and a huge clusterfuck ensued. First, the banking information was entered for the wrong person. One of them realized and had it corrected, but the other wasn't fixed. So both salaries went to one person. The unpaid guy started refusing to come to work, but payroll said that the payment cleared and the account was in his name, so he was terminated for refusing to come to work. He kept calling, and the hour support team kept misidentifying him as the other guy who was still working for us. So when they raised a ticket to get his bank information changed, they changed the info of the wrong guy. So now the guy who doesn't work for us is getting paid the salary of a guy who does. When this was finally worked out, the first guy was given his job back, but on his first day back security misidentified him and issued him a badge of the other employee. So now he was clocking hours for the other guy and not getting paid again because he never clocked in for himself. It took about 3 months for all this to be worked out. Moral of the story is use a ducking email address to identify people. Edit. Yes, the employees had unique IDs. The problem was people were searching for them by name and tunnel visioning on the first result. Also, I was suggesting the email can be used to identify people face to face or over the phone. I wasn't suggesting it should be used as the primary key in a database. Ugh, this story frustrates me. I don't have a common name, but turns out someone at my company has the exact same name as me. So when I got hired, they deleted my account because they thought that I was a duplicate employee account. This resulted in getting locked in the parking lot for half an hour until someone came and badged me out my first day after orientation. That was just one of the many issues I encountered. I once had a temp job in hours. I was scanning lots of old personnel files, and the one perk of the job was reading old complaints against people. The best one I came across was a mediation caused by one member of staff accusing another of witchcraft. She turned me into a newt. Guy came into the interview in sweatpants and a hoodie and said he didn't need the job because of how much money he was making illegally, but he wanted to have a job so the eyes didn't get suspicious. Weirdest part is I don't live in America. I very much doubt the eyes cares about Canadian tax returns. Weirdest part is I don't live in America. I very much doubt the eyes cares about Canadian tax returns. Undocumented immigrant? Eyes don't duck around, even with foreign earnings. Years ago I worked hours for a retail store. A manager would always clock out on time, however the alarm wouldn't be set until about 30 to 45 minutes after he clocked out. Since we had a lot of trouble with internal theft, we assumed he was stealing. Loss prevention approved the installation of cameras across all stores, but we were told not to talk about it to see if we could catch any internal theft. The way the ceiling was set up, the cameras weren't too obvious, but if you knew what to look for, it was quite noticeable. Anyway, turned out this dude was banging a co-worker who was 16. He was 25 expecting his first child with his wife. I didn't see the footage, but our regional manager of loss prevention did and had to turn it over to the police. The real kicker is the girl's dad was a captain on said police force. Edit. I'm not sure what happened to the guy. Unfortunately, I didn't sit in when LP interviewed him. According to my district manager, the authorities were notified, but I'm not sure if he was arrested after the interview was finished. We weren't allowed to discuss what happened, but word got around. This was in Texas and the age of consent is 17, and the female had just turned 16 a few months prior. As for her, she officially resigned, and last I heard she became a nurse who was taking the stuff. I used to work at a staffing agency that placed people at manufacturing positions. Everyone had to be drug tested at the office as part of the orientation. If the pickup came back as inconclusive, we'd send the potential hire to a medical lab. They would take another drug test and the lab could determine if the person was on a prescription or using illegal drugs and therefore not eligible for hire. So one guy failed his drug test at the lab. He came back to the office claiming that it wasn't his fault. He explained that he was riding in a car and he stuck his head over the window. Then, when the car parked under a bridge, someone threw a bunch of cocaine off the bridge. It hit him in the face and he accidentally inhaled it. How did you know it was cocaine? Had to delete someone from the system following them being murdered. Was a bad day. Edit. Over the years I've deleted 7 deaths including the murder, 1 pedophile and 1 murderer. I had to do that for a work colleague that died in his sleep. I'd spoken to him less than 2 hours before he died. It's a weird feeling. And a guy who worked the overpass shift because he was doing support for our Asia/Europe regions got written up for improper use of company systems. He had dozens if not hundreds of Google image searches related to foot fetish stuff. Like insert celebrity hair feet along with other random stuff like cute toes, etc. Like dude, you're in it. You know this stuff is tracked and that your boss could easily monitor it. Did he get docked any wages for not working or did the company just foot the bill? One of the candidates I was interviewing via Skype answered a phone while in his boxers and a tank top, then stood up to grab his blazer that was probably about 3 feet away. I had to see him in his stretched out boxers too. Had a porn site up and open during a shared screen trial to see how well he can use the digital classroom. I had to remind him I can see his screen. He goes, oh yeah sorry, next. Instead of just closing it from the corner of his partially hidden window, he clicks open the window in full view then closes it. That was nice eater. No, guys, he didn't get the job. Also I got an award for this. Thank you, random citizen. Digital classroom. Don't tell me he was interviewing for a teaching position. I was a recruiter and you would be shocked to see what some people actually have as their personal email. Most people have come around to using just their name, but then every once in a while you'll have to verify that brown glitter 69 is in fact how they would like to be contacted. I'm a teacher. There are a lot of angry parents who are still using their hotmail from high school like Studman6969 and Super Sexy Chick 16. OBV fake. Makes it hard to take them serious. The new receptionist was coming in every morning and opening up programs/documents to make it look like they were busy, and they'd sit with one hand on their mouse and one hand on their keyboard and stare blankly at their screen for 8 hours a day and not do anything. They'd also consistently pick up the phone and hang it up without saying anything so that it would stop ringing. I sat in on their termination and the employee started screaming at the manager about how they were doing an amazing job and they had to give them another chance. I was 100% confident that they were just trying to get some easy money and wouldn't be surprised that they were finally getting fired. The whole thing was just bizarre. They'd sit with one hand on their mouse and one hand on their keyboard and stare blankly at their screen for 8 hours a day and not do anything. How? You'd think eventually just sheer boredom would compel them to do something. Call center employee calls hours to complain about their supervisor as abusive. He won't even let me leave my desk. Supervisor calls hours to complain about employee. Can you please tell that she's allowed to leave her desk? Oh my god. She's just in her trash can. It may sound humorous, but there were significant mental issues at the heart of this. Imagine if it was a metal wire trash can. The family of the guy who passed away came to speak to us. It was in a factory environment. To get pension docs etc. We sent them away with a to-do list. 1 hour later reception pinged us saying Mr. X's family was here. Strange. The documents take a few days to get. Nope. New family. Yup. The guy had 2 different families who were about to have a fun surprise. Well, because both of them were nominated beneficiaries of his will, we had to call both of them in. Had to highlight the nominations. Then the main squeeze found out about side hustle and it was crazy. Wife took side hustle to court for fraud. She lost. One of my relatives worked in tech support for a really high profile company in Silicon Valley during the height of the .com boom. Some guy who desperately wanted to work there was emailing his resume to ours 1000 times every day. Several times a day, the number of emails would get too overwhelming. So the people in ours would just select all the emails in the inbox and delete all of them, whether the emails were from the applicant or not. My relative had to show them how to filter emails from the applicant. This was a tech company. I work hours for a call center. Entire company has around 500 employees, maybe 250 of them are in the call center. Entry level work, tiny bit more than minimum wage. A girl started her first week doing really well, and then week 2 got really weird. She walked into the CEO's office on another floor in the building while he was meeting with someone to demand that he buy her a dog because she thought having a companion would improve her work performance. That was the entirety of her rationale. Edit. Many are asking. No, she did not get the dog. I wasn't in the room with the CEO, so I don't know exactly how he handled it. He is an exceptionally nice human being, so I assume he handled it kindly. Though, I mean it made its way back to ours pretty quick, so he definitely told some people about it. My colleague spoke with her about it and was just like, no, that's not a thing, WTF. She was fired soon after for unrelated reasons, attendance I believe. Also many are questioning if she had some kind of mental disorder. I have no idea. I knew many people like this in college. I ran in pretty weird circles, so I met a lot of real characters. Usually they had undiagnosed or untreated mental health issues and were very sheltered by their parents. No sense of normal social boundaries and a heaping dose of entitlement. This is the kind of stuff they would do at jobs and school. No idea how they are surviving in the real world. Likely still living with their parents and hopping from one call center to the next. Many never finished their degrees. Kind of sad really. I also know people who got help and are now living happy stable lives. My dad works in ours. He just told me about a day when they had to lay off about half of the company. It was crazy and there were a whole lot of moving parts that day. Unfortunately, in all the craziness, no one remembered to tell this one new hire that sadly the position he was hired for was no longer affordable. So he came into the office, only to see everyone clearing out their desks and leaving. And then, he got laid off. An hour into his first day. He said the guy understood, but it was the most horrible he ever felt for someone in his life. My old company just went through a huge layoff. 60%, and one of the people laid off had just started a week prior, relocated from multiple states over, and has a newborn. Open bracket. Caught a site manager with like 50 plus pairs of panties hidden all over his office in Ziploc bags, a multitude of sex toys, and over 100k in cash, stuffed in ceiling tiles. Took a while to unravel all of that. So you locked out his building access and told the VPs you found 60k in the ceiling, right? I worked closely with ours in a call center. You'd get some crazy stuff. Guy that carried a cooler every day was wiping chiz on random walls and desks. It was his chiz in his cooler. We thought it was his lunch. He got caught when he wiped it on the front desk directly in sight of the camera. Another guy had a colostomy bag that he refused to empty when it got full. You would find these trails of liquid poo randomly, and we had to throw out 4 chairs that he ruined. He was fired quickly and tried to claim discrimination because he was a veteran. You'd also get a crazy amount of period stains on chairs. Look, it happens, but when it's the same few people and we have free sanitary supplies in the bathroom, you know they just don't care. This reminded me of a contractor on a project I also worked. Friend of mine worked in ours. She told me someone was urinating in their cube. They had moved this contractor a few times because his cube would start to smell of urine. Guy claimed he had no idea what was causing it. Company would move him, have area professionally cleaned, and process would start again. After the third move they put cameras up. Turns out contractor would take a coffee cup to the bathroom, urinate in it, and then return to cube and pour it out on the floor. He was fired and escorted out with his cup. We had this new hire. I heard about him through the grapevine. He was fired from his last job for masturbating in the break room. Somehow, he was hired to my company, God knows why, because I haven't heard a single good thing about from anyone ever. His job was to sweep the floor of our factory. That's not back-breaking work. It's pretty much endless, but you can take it slow and have time to chit-chat with other employee and roam around. We have retired and disabled people who do that job and they are fine with it. In the first 3 weeks he was there, I got so many write-up, extended break time, job not done after multiple request, smoking on the job, and not in designated area, constantly on his phone, complaint, racist/sexist joke, body odor, OSHA violation, not wearing PPE. About him, it was hard to keep track. So I did what I always do. Fast track his termination and send it to the head of ours. I hear nothing about it until a few weeks later. I start receiving complaint about him again. I go see the head of ours, asking if those were just delayed paperwork, because in my mind he was fired weeks ago. Turns out, he was never fired. He was the nephew of the head of ours. She transferred him to another department. She took every complaint about him directly, except one that got to me. He was now a security guard, but not like you see in music festival. He was a button operator. He operated the button to let the people in the factory and kept track of everybody that entered or left the site. He was under training with the sweetest old lady there is. Everybody, even the CEO, call her grandma because she just so sweet. I encounter grandma on break one day and she looked disturbed. It was not her usual break time, so I ask her what she's doing in the break room alone so early. She tell me it's new hire. Personal time. I ask her what she mean. She tell me, well, you know, I made lots of complaint about it. Haven't you read them? I say, no, none of them got to me. She looked disturbed and almost like crying. She then tell me, since he was transferred to her, he noticed there was a computer at his post to logins and outs. Bear in mind, this computer does not connect to the internet. Well, the second day, while grandma was gone to bathroom, he started masturbating with porn he brought from home on a flash drive. She caught him, and he acted like it was no big deal. In the weeks that followed, he continued to masturbate on the job to the point where he would not even stop when grandma caught him. He told her, I don't give a duck if you watch, but if you don't want to see it, just leave. So she made a schedule where every 2 hours she would leave for 15 minutes for him to do his business. I was pissed and went straight to the head of ours with it. I told her that grandma had gotten a lawyer and was threatening to sue the company. I knew it was false, but that's the only thing that could make a thing move. The matter was transferred to the legal department and he was fired that very morning. The head of ours still argued that without proof, we could not fire him. The meeting ended with her storming out and saying, fine, do whatever you want. She quit a few months after that edit. I'm very glad you all enjoyed that. I have so many more memories about this place of work. Not all about ours, but this place of work is basically like the TV show Dallas. I can't fathom sticking up for any family member or friend like that. I'm pretty sure I'd smack them on the back of the head and say, get your chiz together. I'm glad ours left because she sucked too. Obscuring a few details here, you'll understand why in a second. There was a mid-level supervisor at a state agency I never got along with. Guy was nasty, argumentative, real piece of work, but still had a decent amount of people loyal to him. I come in one day and he's not there. Everyone was distraught. Turns out law enforcement had come after the guy, caught him red-handed trafficking child pornography. Rather than arrest him immediately, they gave him the option to return home, settle his affairs, maybe call his lawyer. He took the opportunity to simply hang himself in his own garage instead. The next couple of weeks was just damage control among the staff when the details came out. Horrible situation all around. There was a very similar incident at the first company I worked at before I started working there. They had a ex-con guy who was said to be a little creepy. Apparently the feds came by while he was out and were looking for him. Apparently when he was told about it he freaked out and said he wouldn't go back to prison and left and went home and shot himself. It was suspected he was also involved in CP, hence the feds. Worked for a large trucking company. Every employee would get a present on their birthday in the mail and their names on the video board. This week's birthdays are. A guy called to ask if his name could not be on the board. Reason: his twin brother murdered his parents and he did not want to be reminded of his birthday. Reasonable request compared to all the hijinks I've read so far. Female GM banging 3 co-workers at the same time. Fight broke out once everyone found out about it. I had this with 2 VPs banging the same director, sometimes in the same night. We had a woman who was terrible at her job, always off sick, never met a deadline. Anyway, protocol was followed. Because some people had given her half-decent staff reviews, to get rid of her she called in the union to support her. This dragged the process. Then when she got the final papers she sent them back saying she couldn't be fired, she was pregnant. This woman was 54. It turned out she had frozen eggs, so she defrosted them, etc. The process proving no discrimination then began. 6 months go by, she gets served again. We worked at an organization, big building in Manhattan, hence terrible bureaucracy. Papers come back, that isn't me, you've sent the documents to. Turns out she had provided a false passport when hired, she was actually in her 60s. In the end they gave her early retirement, to get it over with. Amazing how hard some people will work to be lazy. I had to see a video of a guy who cheers himself during work while running to the restroom because his manager won't let him leave a meeting early. The guy had IBD and the manager knew this, so the video show him running down the hall and literally a few feet from the restrooms, he starts chisting himself and you see it coming down his leg pant. He looked to be in pain cause he kinda collapsed and then got back up. People were baffled when they saw this live. Lol, manager equals fired, so definitely the weirdest chiz I've ever seen. Literally. I learned from an early age not to listen when someone acts like you need their permission to go chiz. Not ours but it. We had a guy start and immediately start using his work computer to watch porn. Now this immediately caused some alarms to go off on it. So because it was my job to keep an eye on stuff like this, I decided to do this guy a solid because it was his first day and physically go to his office and tell him he couldn't do that at work. Guy gets all kinds of pissed off at me and storms off 2 hours to lodge a complaint against me for trying to tell him how to do his job. Dude gets fired because he stormed in 2 hours and told them how the it guy was trying to tell him that he couldn't watch porn in the privacy of his office. Edit. It would be that my most updated comment is about a dude beating off at work. Holy hell, you're watching porn on your first day and an it guy visits you saying dude, WTF. And you don't take the hint? Not in ours, but hiring manager. The candidate made a remark that made me do a double take. Don't remember exactly what, just a small cue that I picked up on. I made sure he understood that we will not tolerate any racism at all, and he proceeds to rattle off multiple racial slurs to show how he can't be racist if he is comfortable enough to use those words. Obviously didn't get hired, so he proceeded to contact our department to complain that I somehow tricked him into saying what he said. SMH. No, I'm not racist. I know all the racist terminology, so I know not to use them. So I'm the best at not being racist. What, you don't believe me? Here's all the terms I know in alphabetical order. I'll throw in a few jokes I shouldn't make too. I've shared this story before, but an employee from a different country and culture never showered. He said that where he comes from, they shower about once a month. His coworkers complained of the smell, which was gaggingly offensive. His supervisor eventually sent him home and told him he couldn't come back until he showered. It was a union business and the guy filed a grievance with the union steward. They came into my office, which has a camera, because it was where we had all major disciplinary meetings. The moment they walked into my office, I almost gagged from the smell. It was suffocating. I had 2 chairs in front of my desk, and I asked them to take a seat while I went and pulled his file. When I left, I pulled the door closed behind me. I went to my boss's office, told him the situation, and asked him to pull up the camera in my office. It was hilarious. The union steward was holding his shirt over his nose and telling the guy, "Goddamn dude, you're killing me. You've got to take a shower." After letting them marinate in the stench for about 10 minutes, I went back in, and the union steward retracted his grievance and agreed to send the guy home. In what country do they shower once a month? I no longer work in ours or at this company, but it's my favorite story from my time there. Our benefits team made the decision to eliminate reserved parking as lots of employees were frustrated when they walked past dozens of empty spots in the reserved lots every day. This new policy applied to all of the company's locations. Of course, the benefits manager received hundreds of complaints in the first few days from people insisting they needed an exception for their own personal spot. The best reason by far was from one person who needed a spot close to the door because they were terrified of bobcats. No other context. We didn't have bobcats near the corporate office, so at first we thought they meant construction equipment. Turns out there actually were sightings of bobcats, like the animal, near this person's location. Last I heard they were told to arrive earlier to get a closer spot and didn't get an exception. People are freaking crazy about their parking spot. I'm out of an office that has a parking lot for just about 100 vehicles. We have a early Saturday shift that consists of myself and 4 other guys. One guy comes into the office pissed off, grabs the keys to a company pickup and moves it across the parking lot. I asked what his problem was. He says, "I'm sick of these assholes parking in my spot. Our parking lot is not reserved in any way and there were 90 plus open parking spots at this point in time, but he went through all the effort to park his vehicle, come into the building, get the key for the company pickup, move the pickup, and move his vehicle to his parking spot." I was speechless. I work at my family's business in the industrial sector, and ours is one of the hats I wear. 2018 was insanely busy for us, so we had to hire a staffing agency to get some general labor guys in. It's a simple wax on, wax off kind of job. The most memorable part of that hectic summer was one temp that the agency sent over for third shift, midnight 8 AM. We will call him Bobby for this story. Bobby shows up wearing nothing but a pair of cargo shorts, so we had to provide pants, shirt, and steel toes. Come break time at 4, he decided to go out to the parking lot and scale the building, about 30 feet, probably climbed a tree or something, had a smoke, and managed to turn the security camera away from the parking lot. Bobby then walked away from the job and went home in the uniform and boots we provided for him. We he wanted to break into some of the cars, but nothing was gone. Ended up costing probably $300 for training, uniform and just wasting our time. TL. Dr. Temp employee scaled the 30 feet building and played with the security cameras on his first day. Edit. Employee's name. That's temp workers for you, especially general labor. We've had more than one show up drunk and or high on their first week. Ours stole me for a couple weeks after an angry prostitute tried driving through one of our gates looking for Anthony. She'd met him on a dating site and he owed her $350 and a car for her abortion. We didn't have an Anthony working there, but many of the other details she gave the police in her statement led the company to believe she wasn't totally delusional. Ours picked on me because my last job, before becoming management, was it. I spent 2 days walking around to every PC at my location, updating proxy settings, telling my coworkers that I'd figured out how to make email faster. I felt like an idiot, but it worked. The next 12 days I watched a squid proxy. I mailed Anthony on day 1, but ours kept me at it. The company had a guy looking for pictures of animal faces on plates. He claimed it was for a college art project, but the man was over 60 and not having the company pay for any courses. Mixed breed terrier on Corel saucer. One of the images he looked at officially counts as the weirdest shiz I've ever seen. Mixed breed terrier on Corel saucer. One of the images he looked at officially counts as the weirdest shiz I've ever seen. This is a guy that's seen a bunch of different shizzes, so I believe him. While firing someone and listing off the reasons they were being termed, the person goes, "Yeah, I mean I did that, but you don't have to fire me, yo. I didn't violate a procedure and it doesn't say no sex in our code of conduct." Exact quote. What was he being fired for? Having sex with a building secretary guard in the parking lot of our building, and it was all recorded on surveillance. Was that wrong? Should I have not done that? I tell you, I gotta plead ignorance on this thing, because if anyone had said anything to me at all when I first started here, that sort of thing was frowned upon, you know, cause I've worked in a lot of offices and I tell you people do that all the time. I was an hour manager for a small company that shared an office with a mid-sized business. Their hour manager really disliked us, mainly because our company cultures really clashed. It wasn't a big deal for a long time, maybe just a little tense, until one day they decided to terminate one of the shared administrative staff members. I wasn't part of this decision, though I agreed with it, and technically that was their employee. The other our manager, let's call her Cheryl, calls me into her office to inform me the next morning that this admin had been let go. Cheryl made it clear I was not to email our company's employees and inform them of the change in employment status. As she put it, they'll find out when they get in, and she isn't here, and if they don't, well, that's not my problem. Lovely. That is not how handle communication matters in my company, and I was completely uncomfortable with it. So I go to a VP and discuss what we should do. He says to hold off for a day, let everything settle, then go back and work out a strategy with Cheryl on how to redirect employees who use the old admin until we can hire a new one. Most of our employees, unlike those, work out in the field, so it would be important to communicate with those individuals specifically, but it could hold a day. We knew that the old email for the admin was being forwarded to Cheryl, so at least someone was watching the emails in case something critical came through. Okay, cool. Not 2 hours later, Cheryl comes barreling into the cubicle area of our office screaming about how our employees are idiots. They clearly are too dumb to understand that the employee who was terminated the night before was no longer with the company. She was sick of getting our stupid emails and didn't want to have to deal with our incompetent employees emailing her non-stop. I was a horrible manager. I didn't know how to control my people. I clearly wasn't able to handle my job. Just insulting me, our employees, the entire company at the top of her psychotic lungs. I was clearly to blame, and she was going to get me in so much trouble. She goes running into the CEO's office and starts flipping out about me. It was a complete clusterfuck. She had friggin' set me up as a scapegoat in case her lovely approach to ours went wrong, and when it did, immediately tried to throw me under the bus for something she did. I believe that someone had sent the admin a time-critical email the night before, and Cheryl hadn't caught it, and the deadline had passed for the item maybe 15 minutes before she actually opened the request. Thankfully, I'd already talked to the VP, who was a lifesaver. Cheryl was reminded that whatever had happened was her damn fault, and she was told behind closed doors that if she ever did that again, our company would be logging major complaints with her company, and the CEOs of the two companies were close friends. She told every new hire they had that our company was full of lazy, entitled assholes, and actively encouraged hostility between people in each company. She forbid our company from going into their part of the office, despite the shared and partially paid for by us soda fridge being over there, would host office lunches for her company and bring the leftovers across the hall to other companies so that our employees couldn't get some. It was the most petty, childish reaction to her attempt to slander me and get me in trouble. We moved offices in under 6 months. I'm surprised she's still working there. I work for a software development consulting company where we go onto client sites and help them develop custom software. One dude, super nice, 7-ish years of experience, goes on to his first client with the company and all is good for about 3 weeks. Until the following happened, an increased escalation every couple of days. 1. I don't think the manager likes me. 2. The manager is bad-mouthing me to others. 3. The manager isn't copying me in meetings, so I don't know they're happening and miss them. 4. The manager is taking away my completed tasks from the board, so I don't look like I'm being productive. 5. The manager is logging onto my computer remotely and reading my personal emails. 6. The manager is changing my consulting company, not client, timecodes, which the manager has absolutely no access to. Essentially, it turned out that he had mental health challenges and thought the manager was sabotaging his every move on the client site. The paranoia just kept going. Unfortunately, he got kind of belligerent at the end. I hope he got the help he needed, but it was super uncomfortable. How do you tell someone that their perception isn't reality? I actually did have a manager try and sabotage me once. It was a really weird experience. I had just been hired as a key holder at a small gift store. It was a little boutique, so it had a small staff and we typically worked by ourselves. The morning after one of my first days closing by myself, I got a call from the district director, who often worked out of our office, saying that I had done a poor job cleaning up before I left. The displays were a mess, things on their side, etc. The things he was describing weren't true, and I politely told him I had indeed straightened up, and I was confused. It happened again a few times after that. I was really frustrated because I knew I was doing a good job and I had left another job to work there. The only thing I could think of was that the manager was doing it after I left. Turned out I was right. He lived close to the store and would come by after I left to mess things up. I'm not sure how they found out. I think they maybe suspected it themselves. He saw me as a threat because I had store management experience prior to working there and his sales were poor. So this Rick tries to get me fired. He ended up getting axed and I got promoted to his position anyways. Cemetery keeper admits he buries animals that die in the cemetery in occupied graves. Police won't investigate as unlikely to be able to convict. Employer won't tackle as he is old and litigious. So someone's nana is currently bunk bedding with a mudjack and apparently that's okay. LMAO. I wonder when archaeologists find graves with animals and conclude they were buried with their pets, if it was really something more like this. I'm not in ours, but I have a weird ours related story involving this 6 pairs of brand new Levi jeans I have. My best friend works for this pretty big company and one day he gets approached by one of his bosses, who is in his late 40s. He asks my friend where he got his jeans because he liked them a lot, and my friend tells him that they are just Levi he got at the store in Wicker Park here in Chicago. He says cool, and then my friend doesn't think about it. That weekend he actually ends up at the Levi store looking for a denim jacket. He spots his superior there shopping, and they say hi. He told him that he came down to check out the jeans because he liked my friend so much. They chat a little and my friend introduced his girlfriend and then they left the store leaving his boss to shop. That Monday his boss approaches him and hands him a bag full of jeans. He bought a bunch of them at the Levi store for my friend when he was there and wanted to give them to him. Keep in mind this is at the store itself, so these jeans are full price of about $60 each. My friend said he couldn't accept but he insisted, so he reluctantly took them. He gets back to desk and his coworker sees the jeans and asks what was the deal. He tells him about what happened, not saying who it was, and his coworker was like, was it underscore? My friend confirmed, and his coworker said, oh yeah ours has a whole file on him. He's done this before with other guys. He bought me a bunch of jerseys last year. So apparently this guy liked to buy gifts for his coworkers, all male, and made most of them feel uncomfortable enough they went to ours about it, but he was big enough in the company and he never really did anything totally inappropriate, so nothing was ever done about it. My friend didn't know what to do with the jeans because he didn't feel okay with wearing them himself, plus only a couple of them sorta fit him, so I said I would take them. As you can see they are various sizes because the guy wasn't sure his exact size and just guessed around, but hey they were free for me. I'm not gay but hey, 6 pairs of blue jeans is 6 pairs of blue jeans. I'm not in ours, but I did conduct interviews at a previous job. Literal blood on his resume. I think it was from picking a scab rather than a decent wound, but 100% handed me a bloody resume. Wait, are you British? Did you say, hand me your bloody resume? If so, he was just doing what you asked, mate. This was in the early 2000s, when people still sent paper applications. I worked for a gaming company, so we got a fair amount of unsolicited applications, usually young people trying to break into the industry. But this application letter was extra special. It started with I'm in the center of an international conspiracy, followed by 2 tightly printed A4 pages of the freakiest shiz imaginable. Researcher, onto something. Hunted by dark forces. Agent of other unseen forces he fell out of favor with. And a few weird political tangents. Wanted a job with us because he needed to lay low for a while before he could get out of the country. We were suitably freaked out by the mere fact that he had our office address, chose not to reply, and forwarded the whole thing to corporate hours. I'd play that game. My wife works in hours. She had to question a high-ranking employee about an incident where a lower-ranking employee, who was being talked to about her inappropriate wardrobe choices which clearly violated company policy, decided in an act of protest to take out her, quite large, left breast and smack it down on the table, and ask him in her thick New England accent, is this too much cleavage for you? That sounds like an incident at a place I worked at. The lady that did it also mentioned that she had a tattoo all you can eat. You can guess the area. She was fired and could only get a job at a Walmart Macute counter. 2 people had cut a hole in the wall between their offices. They pushed their filing cabinets to hide the hole on both sides. Cleaning staff was asked to deep clean the offices one day and they found the hole. Both parties involved were married, not to each other. They were having sex through the wall. Edit so I don't have to answer the same question a few times. The hole was cut so that just the body was visible. Heads were not. I didn't ask logistics, but my imagination has led me to believe doggy style. She backed up as far as she could, and they had sex in the wall for lack of better understanding. Edit 2. Walls were terribly thin. Also came out, after they were both fired they cut through asbestos in the wall. No WCB claim opened for them. Thanks for the award, anonymous stranger. Kind of brilliant really. I started working in HR Reich function shortly after college. It took a few years before I got to make hiring decisions, but it happened eventually. The first position I was to fill was an admin for a client's leadership, middle manager over / 300 people. After interviews we ended up with a super bright and professional lady. Her fake name for this story will be Sarah. Sarah always had the biggest smile, was super positive, and everyone loved having her on the team. 3 months later, the client calls me. Painted, we need to talk about Sarah. Is everything okay? No, it really isn't. Do you have her emergency contact information? You need to get in touch with her mom. She needs to come to the hospital. We are heading there now too. Several hours of juggling calls to family, the general manager, our parent corporation's legal and our teams, and a federal investigative body ensued. Sarah had jumped off a 7-story parking garage, which was on site at the federal facility we were supporting. TL. Doctor, my first hire killed herself at work, triggering a federal investigation. Edit. Wow. First Reddit award. I appreciate the generosity, but if anybody else feels a need to award, please send the funds to a charity instead of Reddit. AFSP, F and ACLU are all good options. That got dark fast. Was expecting a light-hearted story about drugs or chislinging or something. Not ours, but I had to fly on short notice to Norway to hammer some bugs out of a system at a customer site over a 24-hour period. As I was heading back to my hotel for a few hours sleep before my flight home, I was asked to redirect to another site across country as one of our engineers had gone missing at some point over the weekend. He hadn't turned up at the customer site on Saturday night, and the 3 guys he was working with hadn't heard from him. I arrived there early on Sunday morning and had to do the rounds of the hotel, bars, embay, hospitals, and finally the police station, where the dumbchiz had gotten himself locked up, lied about his identity, and was being charged with assaulting an officer. Cue a few hours on the phone to get his room packed up and flights arranged to let the deportation proceed in an orderly fashion. He still can't go back there, and God knows what the hotel staff must have thought when I rocked up, asking for a manager to let me into his room, as we didn't know if this bloke had topped himself in the bathtub or fallen off a pier. Fun times. So if I'm understanding this right, he is banned from Norway? One of the dumbest things, an employee that worked night audit at a hotel parked his car at the entrance and would occasionally go out there to drink a bottle of vodka in full view of the cameras. He didn't even sit in his car to drink, just grabbed the bottle out of the car each time and drank in the open. Seriously, he could have put it in a water bottle and drank at the desk and would have not been caught as soon as he was, if at all. We had an employee do this during his lunch break, but more discreetly. Then he would fill his McDonald's cup and drink from it all afternoon. After 6 weeks or so, he was fired after being reported for smelling like booze at work. 4 days later, his obituary was in the paper. He was in his 50s. I can't help but feel like this pushed him over the edge, and I think about him from time to time. While back at a very sales-focused company, can't go into too many details, the story got passed around the industry for a while and I'd rather it remain anonymous. It was crunch time for basically every department. Lots of orders, lots of money made, but with a bunch of pressure to deliver on those orders. Tensions were a bit high, so we did a few things to raise morale and keep people happy. We had some lunches catered in, donuts and coffee brought in for people, just small things to bring the mood up. After a week or two of this kind of atmosphere in the office, I get notified by one of the sales managers to hold a disciplinary meeting for one of sales guys who had been around for a few years. I knew this guy, call him Dave, but never really talked to him much. Seemed alright, not one of the ones I'd expect to be a troublemaker. What surprised me was that this meeting apparently also included one of the newer sales guys, been out of college for maybe a year, and also not one of the ones I'd expect to cause trouble. Turns out Dave had been coping with the stress of the office by sneaking into empty conference rooms with his cell phone and enjoying some pornography. It said that, since he did it on his own phone, they couldn't track it. Well, Ben stumbles across him, which you'd think would just make an awkward moment and maybe a report 2 hours. But instead, maybe due to stress of his own, started loudly yelling at Dave to stop slacking off and started taking swings at him. This broke out into a fist fight in the room, which drew a crowd and ultimately broke some of our video conferencing equipment. After a minute, someone managed to get the two of them apart, which calmed things down for about 10 seconds before someone made a joke about Dave throwing punches with the same hand he had been touching himself with, which somehow provoked Ben to lunge at him again and take another swing before being restrained. The weirdest part? After the meeting, and like a week of internal discussion, during which both sales guys kept working to keep orders rolling in, we had to make a decision. Our department head had carefully gone over the rules and relevant laws on alt charges and things, and determined that Ben be terminated for alting an employee, but Dave not be fired, and instead required to attend sexual harassment training to keep his job. As a result, a week later, we had to send an office-wide email informing people that referring to the incident in vulgar terms, off the record, my favorite was Dave, you beat that kid, like you were beating your meat in there, was technically grounds for warning under our sexual harassment policies. Did Dave have his rick out during the fight? Not ours, but have been on teams to interview and have been put on possible hires. One standard question: what would you do if you were having problems with a coworker? Answers can include, I would try and work it out, or I would take it to a manager, etc. His answer: I'd take him out back and beat the chiz out of him. He was surprised when he didn't get the job. Everyone has had a coworker who really needed some sense knocked into him/her. NSFW not in ours, but a tech manager who was hiring. After struggling to get some decent profiles for a few days, I escalated the hours debt and explained to them the impact this on the project delay. They dumped a bunch of about 50 profiles on me. Many were just junk, but one profile stood out. It started decently. Top most college, engineering and comp SC, many pet projects, top companies in the front page. But this is where it went bizarre. The candidate claims that he is sick of corporates. He wants to modify his pet software as a tool for sex predators to hunt for their victims. This is in lieu for his own suicide. I did not have the guts to go through any further. Needless to say, the concerned hours got an earful. Did this come out at interview, or was that actually written in a CV? Obligatory not ours, but in a previous job, the night security guy was connecting 121 to cam girls on overnight shifts using Workit. CamGirl recorded their sessions and blackmailed him. Bowers had to watch the footage of him choking the chick into completion. Lovely. Bowers had to watch the footage of him choking the chick into completion. Hey, I don't like it just as much as you do, Ryan, but you know the rules. We watch until completion. Not in ours, but my sister-in-law used to be one for a large Canadian tech firm. An executive at the company got very drunk at a conference in Vegas, and the company got a call from the hotel saying they'd have to pay for outside contractors. He had rubbed his poop all over the walls of his hotel room, and the hotel cleaning staff refused to deal with it. The whole rubbing poop on the walls thing is so uniquely strange to me. To some extent I could understand how you could kill someone in a fit of rage or make some other awful mistakes, but that one truly baffles me. What the hell inspires you to rub chiz on the wall? You must have truly lost your mind. Worked in hours for a couple years now, mostly for large firms managing facilities within properties. One of the strangest cases was brought about because a client asked us to review CCTV footage as he'd driven past the office late at night and noticed the motion sensor lights inside going on and off and was concerned there had been a break-in. Turned out our night security officer, whose primary role is to monitor cameras from the control room, was skipping up and down the corridors cause he felt too full of energy and had to get it out of his system somehow. Watching the footage of him skipping, featuring the occasional star jump through vacant corridors for 20 minutes at 1 AM, really made my day. Without a doubt the most wholesome post on this thread. I was a trainer and recruiter at a call center of about 150 employees for a few years. It was in a low-income city, so we saw a lot of crazy chis. A woman who showed up for her first day in a white t-shirt and a pink bra that we could see through her shirt, and flipped out when we talked to her about it. A manager who would hit on every female employee under the age of 25. They all either quit or got into it, and he ended up having multiple side chicks. His main girlfriend got promoted from his team into the payroll department because the company didn't want to address it or change their policy, which didn't address office relationships. He was well into his mid-40s. My coworker, a male in his late 40s who texted candidates after their interview saying he would get them the job if they went out with him. Mind you, this was for $10 an hour chisty job, but these girls were desperate. He ended up making so many women uncomfortable that a few that we hired ended up coming forward, and the company actually fired him. A weird employee who used to scratch his head so often that there would be flakes of skin all over his workstation, and all of his co-workers that sat around him complained to me, and I had to address it. Turns out it was a compulsion and he couldn't stop. Edit. The part that bothered everyone about him the most was that he would scrape the dead skin flakes into piles and leave them on his desk. His black keyboard was almost white. He never put the piles on the floor or in the trash can that every employee was issued at their cubicle. You could literally see a white haze above his cubicle. Other people were freaking out because it was getting on their desks. An employee who had diabetes and who used to have medical emergencies in the middle of work. He would keep 6 cans of Mountain Dew on his desk to drink throughout his shift. We couldn't tell him to stop doing that, even though it was obvious that he was creating his own health issues. An employee who claimed to be friends with Cardi B before she moved to our area from New York City. This girl told me that she and her ex-boyfriend had worked at a call center and had taken credit card info from hundreds of people and made good money doing it. Obviously we fired her, and she was shocked. She was still in training when she told me this. I was a ducking hours member and training her, and she said this in front of 4 other employees in training. Like, seriously, dumber? In that same training class I had an employee who had a stroke in the middle of our 4-week training course. My boss told me to fire him and let him reapply when he was able to speak again. I refused. We had to make reasonable accommodations for him, and we actually had clerical positions that required no speaking, but she wouldn't give one to him. That was the last straw, and I left the company. And then of course dozens of employees who didn't know how to use a computer, who didn't know how to right click, who used the caps lock key to type capital letters at the beginning of sentences. Edit. Unless you have a physical disability that only allows you to use one half of your body, you're a ducking idiot if you use the caps lock key to capitalize only one letter. There are 2 shift keys on your keyboard. Use them. Good on you for the stroke one. What kind of arsehole does that? Got a call from our office in India that staff who supported the night shift were running a brothel from the office. They didn't know they couldn't do that. Still fired. They tried to appeal the decision. Did not work. Wait, as in like 1 or 2 guys on night shift, or like a whole night team? Not exactly weird, but I work in hours and we have 2 people with the exact same name, but in different departments. This still causes confusion sometimes, but the most awkward was last year at the Christmas party. We have this annual Employee of the Year award and the name was announced before mentioning the department or other info, although I warned the MC not to do that, as we had 2 people with the same name. Let's just say the wrong one got the most excited until he realized it wasn't him. That's so unfortunate. I got a call from a woman I'd never spoken to, asking when she could start. She'd received a job offer after interviewing with the manager for a customer service position, she told me, but no one ever contacted her about a start date or pre-employment processes like a background check, and it had been a month. After a lengthy investigation, it came out that this manager had fabricated a job opening and offered it to this woman in an attempt to impress her. She quit her job, but, it should be noted, did not respond to the manager's romantic overtures with the expectation of joining my company. She got a settlement with an NDA, and the guy who hired her got fired. There was also a guy who faked his son's death for some extra PTO. I worked with a lady that told everyone she had breast cancer and needed time off for surgery, chemo, etc. Our insurance was crap, so the partners in the business all chipped in to pay for her medical bills. The whole office took turns preparing meals and delivering them to her house while she was recovering. While she was out, one of our co-workers ran into her husband at a bar and asked how his wife was. The husband didn't know what the co-worker was talking about. Turns out the co-worker got implants and never had cancer. She didn't have enough PTO to cover her surgery and recovery, so she made up the cancer story. She got terminated for other performance issues after her return to work. A guy who was so high at the time of his interview that he forgot who he was meeting and why. Our applications say we do not hire violent felons. A guy checked that he was felon. When I asked him about it, he said it was for domestic violence and stalking. I asked him if he read the part about us not hiring violent felons, and he just couldn't connect the dots. It's got violence in the name of the charge, dude. Literally had a guy complain, how come we only have overtime when you want it? You meaning the company. That's how jobs work, man. In casual conversation, a guy told me the hilarious story about how his girlfriend got an IUD without his permission, so he ripped it out by the strings. Had a mom show up on behalf of her son for the interview. In casual conversation, a guy told me the hilarious story about how his girlfriend got an IUD without his permission, so he ripped it out by the strings. Hol up. My mum once represented a primary school caretaker, janitor, at a disciplinary meeting. He'd filmed himself ducking his girlfriend on the school premises with the school camera and left the tape in it, where it was subsequently found by another member of staff. Obviously he was immediately suspended, and they took the keys to the building off of him. So he broke into the school that night to try and get the tape back. Needless to say, he didn't keep the job. Not ours, but a company I worked at. Some employees were playing squash or similar racket sport at a gym. One of the guys had been working there for over a year. Nice guy. At the gym, someone recognized him and called the police. He was arrested shortly afterwards by armed police for an alienation attempt on the King of Spain. He had fled the country and was using a false name. News article. Sentenced to 92 years in prison. How in the world does one pronounce his name? Iniko Gojiskogxiararanatagi. I was an hour officer in the army. So many great ones. 1. Guy gets to our unit, asks to take 5 days leave to marry his fiancée. Sure. Get notice that his wife of 9 years, who lives 500 miles away, hasn't received money or heard from him. They split, but never divorced, so he didn't have to live in the barracks and would get more money, most of which he gave to her. 2. Had an officer get a DUI, had huge drinking problems. She was resigning in lieu of elimination. She was getting out on a Friday, but that Monday, her urinalysis came back hot for cocaine. CID calls her in. She waives all her rights and confesses to how she didn't mean to do coke, but after she got drunk, she thought it was a good idea. She gave CID and our command everything needed to court-martial her. She thought if she didn't confess, they'd do an investigation and she wouldn't get out on Friday. Turns out, the only thing to stop her resignation was a court-martial. Also, she was a military police officer. 3. Got to put in a soldier's medal. The medal is the highest level medal of heroism the military gives out. Heroism is bravery in a non-combat setting, so there's higher valor awards, but the soldier's medal is a huge deal. Short version is the soldier heard screaming and a gunshot next door. Soldier breaks into the apartment, unarmed. He scares the intruder and the intruder ends up shooting himself. Turns out it was the ex-husband. He had murdered the wife and wife trying to find the two kids who had hid him, barging into a gunfight unarmed, while incredibly stupid, saved their lives. 4. 3 soldiers tested positive for meth. Their strategy was to report in every day at 9 PM, so they couldn't be marked a wall. Now, a wall is instantaneous, but stopping pay is 24 absent. The commander never thought to ask me what was going on. When I found out, I stopped their pay. Not allowed, but ducked them. When their pay stopped, they came in to demand justice. We had them detained for 7 days, which gave us all the time needed to separate them. They never fully out-processed, which means they are deserters, and had warrants for their arrest. Almost a year later, I got a call from the nearby Major Cities Police Department saying they had picked up one of the girls for prostitution, and saw we had a warrant. So much paperwork. 5. Lots of sad ones, from divorces to deceased loved ones, ruined lives, suicides, rapes, child porn. Lots of things too personal to share, but military hours can be a pretty wild ride. Lots of sad ones, from divorces to deceased loved ones, ruined lives, suicides, rapes, child porn. Lots of things too personal to share, but military hours can be a pretty wild ride. I don't doubt it. Pretty awesome story about the guy saving the 2 kids, though. What a badder. 100% deserved the medal. Not ours, but our lady gave us a briefing on sexual harassment. At least half a dozen times. She said, so, if you do /this/, that's sexual harassment. Now when /I do that to so and so, that's different, of course, because we're friends and we're cool like that. This same thing happened at my office. Our lady, if Mr. Jones walks up to Jane and starts rubbing her back, that is sexual harassment. But if you see me go up to Joe here starts rubbing his back, it's not sexual harassment, because we are friends. Joe was clearly uncomfortable and laughed nervously until she stopped. It was ugly. She also reminded us to not misgender someone, but to ask them for their preferred pronouns. Someone asked if they weren't sure of the individual's pronouns, if they should just use they. She said absolutely not. They refers to more than one person. If you're not sure, use it. Not on ours, but a guy that was aiming to get hired in the department that I work in sent his curriculum, and the photo that he attached was of him chugging a Tonea, the most cheap drink you can find, and is super trashy. If you drink it too much you will go blind, and without a t-shirt on. Filed under outgoing and charismatic. My wife is an hour manager. In her company, they had a guy that was repeatedly caught masturbating in the shared bathroom. He was repeatedly caught because his sessions included him A. moaning out loud, B. not cleaning up after he was finished. Yes, you read that correctly. The trouble was, he was a very highly skilled machine operator and had many years of experience on a machine that was critical to their manufacturing process, which delivered parts to a very lucrative customer. They couldn't fire him, and he knew it. After being brought into ours several times for the same issue, it became clear that he wasn't going to stop. He even went directly from a meeting with ours to the bathroom for another session. My wife tried to fire the guy many times. They simply couldn't without bringing their process to a halt, missing deadlines and orders, and pissing off their largest customer. The end solution, they hired a guy right out of trade school, explained the situation to him, and offered him a huge increase in pay if he could learn this guy's job and eventually replace him. It took 2+ years, made more difficult by the guy figuring out that he was training his replacement somewhere in the middle of the process. It worked though, and the new kid more than doubled his pay by taking over from this guy. The masturbator had the audacity to file for unemployment after he was let go. My wife tried to fire the guy many times. They simply couldn't without bringing their process to a halt, missing deadlines and orders, and pissing off their largest customer. The graveyards are full of indispensable men. It's never a good idea for any operation to be dependent on one person. Anyone can suddenly become unavailable for a number of reasons. Someone murdered their husband, then called the next day from jail and asked our department for bereavement pay. I'm mourning they didn't get it. Sure, I'll chip in here. Obligatory, not ours, but I have a great story for you guys. So I worked at a domain registrar and hosting provider that had a sister company which ran colocation and VPC services. For the layman among us, I basically worked above a data center, a rather large one. This of course meant that 24/7 cover was obligatory and we had to have NOC, Network Operation Center, staff on site at all times. They worked shift rotations, 4 days on 4 days off, working 10-hour shifts. This meant that every 3 rotations, one of them would be on the midnight, 10 AM rotation. As a side note here, this job is important. Like if something goes down in the DC and it isn't addressed, it could cost our clients and us a significant amount of money. If you don't answer that phone at 4 AM, you could damage a relationship and cost the company a lot of money. If there's a fire and the DC's fire suppression system kicks off, then you have potentially damaged millions worth of kit. You get the picture. So this one guy, we'll call him Ted, starts with the team. Ted's a smart kid, around 18 years old, knows his stuff. Has been there around 3 months before it starts to get noticed that Ted isn't doing a lot on his shifts. Like tickets are being left unanswered, the phone is ringing and not being picked up, and so on. This only ever happens on his night shifts, so he goes under the radar for a bit longer as his day shift performance makes up for it. That is, until one fateful morning at around 7 AM. Our CEO and head of information security come in for an early conference call, and what do they find in the NOC office? Ted, laying on a desk, fast ducking asleep with his hand down his pants and Pornhub on his laptop. This kid wakes up, and oh man does he realize he's in the chiz. Our CEO is a very chill, relaxed man, so he very calmly waited for Ted to write his position on the desk to a sitting one, and then simply says, "Hand over your PA." So Ted does, and the head of info security walks him out of the building. Immediate dismissal. Nice kid, but got him, he messed up in the worst kind of way. Hand over your PA. Not with that hand. A couple stories I remember from different companies. 1. One gentleman decided to go around their office showing people CP to warn them not to let strangers around their kids. 2. One employee walked in on another employee full on masturbating in the bathroom. The company did not want to fire the masturbating employee. Number 1 sounds like the half-baked excuse he came up with when he was caught. Straight to the police with that one. Tech company. Guy hurried a customer at our own company's product showcase/conference. Customer complained and it went directly to the CEO. Guy was fired the next day. His boss tried to argue it wasn't that big of deal and we shouldn't fire him, and tried to leverage himself. If he goes then I'll go. Spoiler, they both went. What are you gonna do? Fire me? Not in ours, but my first real job as an adult. I showed up and sat in the parking lot waiting for the hiring manager to show up for over an hour on my first day. Finally someone else showed up to unlock the door and start my training. Turns out the manager that hired me had been killed by an alligator over the weekend. Duck in Florida, man. Edit, hey, thanks for the award. Not directly in ours, but involved at my last job. We had to let someone go after head worked with the company for over 20 years because he would watch porn for literally hours each day on company equipment without even trying to cover his tracks. And not just any porn. Armpit fetish, gay porn. I feel like armpit fetish probably transcends orientation. At that point, you're just watching something weird. I had someone interviewing for a job and he asked bluntly the name of our president. We told him, and he straight up said, "I can get hired right now and do a much better job than said president. It will be a fool for you all not to hire me." He was applying for an entry-level customer service assistant job. Oh, and he also cussed up a storm during the interview. My dad used to work in a post office in the 90s. Usually it's where the crazy people are. Here's one from our department. There was this dude who would hit on girls by pulling his penis out onto their desk. It became so much of a problem that one girl who was fed up with it stapled his rick down. My dad often says it while laughing. Did he ever do it again? I had to address a special needs employee regarding it being a bad thing he brought a pocket pussy to work. How did I know? He had been showing people. Also, after I had left this organization I saw someone I had hired on the 10 o'clock news for getting caught having sex with a minor in a van in a state park. SMH. Kind of the opposite for my story. I was a contractor and had worked with a few of the departments in the building, ours being one of them. I was out at a bar in a different city and saw about 6 to 7 of the ours reps sitting on the other side ripping shots. They recognized me and called me over to take a few shots with them. Ended up getting plowed with them, and at the end of the night they asked me to keep everything I heard on the down low. I laughed and said, who am I going to report it to anyways? You are all here. Ended up getting plowed. This sentence did not end up where I thought it would. I don't work at ours, but remember one time, a girl ours started working on a software company. She got her PC hacked. I think he remote her desktop and typed in an autopad by a NIT member with a "wanna date me" message. Weird. That's not just weird, that's sexual harassment. Hi. I'm not in ours, but my mom has been for quite a while. A few years ago, when my mom worked at an automotive plant, my mom had an issue with an employee who would clock in on time and then disappear. She asked another of the floor employees if they had seen him and was told he's in the parking lot. So, my mom and one of her co-workers went out to the parking lot and found the employee asleep in his car. Apparently, he'd been clocking in and immediately going out to his car for another hour, also asleep for 2 weeks. I can't remember why it took this long for hours to find out. He didn't see a problem with it if he was clocked in and still on company grounds. Needless to say, they fired him, but I'm sure he was fine with it since he could catch up on sleep now that he didn't have a pesky job getting in the way. We had a guy who was going to take naps in his car during his lunch break. He often came back 15 to 20 minutes late, whatever. He also took 40-minute long bathroom breaks at least 3 times a day. One day he was sleeping in his car for 2 hours until somebody came to knock on his window and wake him up. When he was called to management's office the next day, he was just like, I know, I'm gonna get written up. Just give me the papers. He was fired. Apparently he didn't think it was enough to fire him for just the sleeping in his car was at least 2 violations, because our parking is off property for some reason and you have to clock out to leave property. Not weird as much as kind of funny and inappropriate. Was working in ours at a call center in the early 2000s. Got a visit from the IT guys one day letting me know that a guy in quality control had been visiting porn sites on his work computer. They gave me the report and I set up a meeting with him. So John, you've been visiting adult websites on the job. Well, you know how we do a lot of research, and sometimes you just accidentally land one. It happens. John, you visited one particular site 27 times. Should I grab my things? Yup. After visiting porn sites, it is only appropriate to grab one's things. I'm not in ours, but my friend is ours for the line workers at Tesla. She had a married guy come in asking if he can add a third person to his insurance, a woman who he knocked up on accident. She had to say no, since that is not how insurance works. Edit, per an awesome comment. Thank you. This was not a case of polygamy. He asked her if not only she could be added, but to hide it, so his current wife, so she would not know about it. That was, I think, the scandal. That made sense in my head, but should have added here. Younger guy brought a toddler and baby in a stroller to his interview. He expected me, front desk, to watch them while he interviewed. I mean, thanks for making the effort to come in and interview, but I'm not responsible for your kids. When I was doing hiring, I had one guy come in with his wife, and she was pissed off that she had to wait in our lobby and couldn't sit in on the interview with him. He had aced the phone interview and just fell apart in the in-person interview, so I'm thinking his wife was feeding him answers or just some weird sort of confidence booster for him. Not in ours, but I worked in security about 20 years ago. I came into work as one of our night shift guys was getting fired for printing out porno pictures. It turned out he was viewing them on a company computer and printing them out, but couldn't find the printer they were going to. Guess he was searching the whole building after he realized what he had done. The manager of purchasing came in the next day to a stack of printed out pics on his printer. Somehow it was able to backtrack the credit card being used for all of it, and it was his. Wow, the panic that guy must have felt when he pressed print for the 4th time, only to realize that all these copies were probably going to another floor entirely. Not ours, but I worked on the help desk. I was speaking to a guy over the phone one day and asked him to call me back the next day. Mind you, this guy never missed a call. Fastest hand in the West. I didn't get a call back and didn't think much of it. Dude was probably busy. I was checking the ticket queue and saw his name and was like trying to pull a fast one and not reply to me and log a ticket. I was wrong. He died in his sleep. I had to disable his account. I've never told anyone about this, not even the people I worked with, but it was really painful to do. I sent a "so sorry" etc. to the team and they replied with thanks and their stories of them. I didn't have the heart to reply to them and left the money with the intention to reply one day. I've since left that company and I wish I said my goodbyes to them. Not ours, but I worked on the help desk. Welp. I don't work in hours, but I'm going to talk about my experience with an hours incident when I worked at an amusement park. I was a 21-year-old who supervised the box office kids. I'd have to deal with upset customers, mostly mad about coupons not working, or kicking people out of the park for breaking the rules. One day I go into the gate to talk to my friends about a party the night before. Told my buddy he missed a rager and about some chick blowing dudes right in the middle of the party. I guess I said that last part a little too loud. Got called into hours and given a sexual harassment claim and got written up. Here's the best part. She called me back in the office and said, "Oh, while I have you here, going of the previous year's performance, we are going to give you a 8% raise." In one day I thought I was getting fired to receiving a raise. She called me back in the office and said, "Oh, while I have you here, not going to lie, I sort of half expected the story to take a different turn here. Not proud of it, but here we are." Someone was asked to file the freshly negotiated contracts. In context, this meant to lodge them with the relevant government authority to be processed. Someone proceeded to put them in his filing cabinet because he was asked to file contracts. It was me, 15 years ago. Someone. I had 2 employees at the manufacturing site that I support that didn't get along. Nothing much ever came of it until one of the employees put in his 2-week notice. On this second to last day of employment, he brought a garbage bag full of dog chews with him to work and dumped it on his coworker's car. I'm not sure where he got it from. He either collected it from his dogs for months, or he went to a dog park and just picked all of it up. The amount of dog chews covered the car from the front bumper to the rear window. The only part that wasn't covered was the trunk. Had to counsel an employee who went on a walk and witnessed a decapitation during a domestic dispute happening in our parking lot. Had to fire somebody for making drugs and porn videos in an RV in the parking lot. I had to sit with an employee who was so drunk she couldn't sit up straight in her chair and kept reaching over for her bottle of orange juice with mostly vodka. Waited 3 hours for her husband to show up. When he did, he was drunk too. I had to refuse to let her go and then follow him and drop her off at home. Removed. Yeah, that was amusing when the original person posted it months ago. Reddit. I work hours for a large supermarket chain. We were preparing to open a new store, so we had an off-site office space we're using for hiring and handling paperwork etc. We hire this guy for the store and has been working/training in one of the nearby store until the new store opens. One day he brings his friend in and asks if she can get an interview. We typically will interview anyone with a pulse. She had face tattoos, red eyes, and smelled kind of funky. I already made my mind up about her from the start, but proceed with the interview to be polite. After it's all said and done, they are leaving together, and the guy comes up to me and says I know it would be hard for her to work days due to her, and I cut him off and say yeah, I don't know about those face tattoos, which he responds with I was going to say her brain condition so buried. I tell him yeah, I'm not sure, I'll have to interview other candidates before making my decision. Never did see her again. Her brain condition sounds like methyl mayo. Not ours, but relevant story. It was my second day at a job I had in college. Sitting in a private office. Older gent and I are chatting. Oh, to be your age again. Kind of trouble you probably get into. Young, dumb, and full of cum. Really was out of nowhere. Not talking about his youth, or things I do, or the amount of ejaculate my body has. Of course, this older gent was all of the hours debt, and, I believe, he was setting me up for harem training. Not weird, but first gig in hours, I worked for a company that had a restaurant attached. Teenage girl applies for a job at the restaurant. We, the company, invite her to a job interview. Mom calls, completely enraged, where we got her daughter's address from. She hasn't applied for a job with the company, blah blah. Took me 10 minutes to explain to her that restaurant name was part of company name, and because her daughter had applied to the restaurant, she would be employed by the company. A day later, getting an application for an office job, sales or something related. Handwritten. Well, okay, some people still don't have easily access to computers, but it was adorned with glitter stickers and the cover was a hand-drawn butterfly tribal. Second gig in hours, I'm interviewing a guy for a position as security officer, CSO to be precise. And he knows his stuff. But he's so freaking full of himself. At first, when I come in, he's on the phone because of a freelance gig and leaves me waiting 5 minutes. Then he tells me my name is not modern because the cool girls are not called Catherine anymore, but Caitlin, not my real name, but something similar. Tells me how he had training events with colleagues who can tell me how good he is at his job. When I later ask one of the colleagues, he tells me what an absolute pose the person was during the training. Needless to say that he wasn't offered the job. Someone recently applied for an open job we have, and the email address she used to contact us had a display name Petty Barbie with dem curves. LPT. Create a professional sounding email address for situations like this. If you do have a professional sounding email address already, don't forget to use it. Is professional Barbie with offers appropriate curves an acceptable email? Not me in this interview, but I read the notes. A man turned up to the interview, and things were going well. Halfway through, he stood up and pulled down his pants exposing his penis, before asking the female interviewers if they would duck him. Then he burst into tears and sat and cried. He did not get the job. That could be a tragic level of Tourette's. A friend of mine was hiring. A gal walks into the interview with a bug that she found outside. My friend said during the entire interview, she was watching it crawl around on her hands. She would talk to the bug when she answered his questions, never once making eye contact with him. This happened a couple of years ago when I worked in hours at a smallish company. It was Memorial Day weekend, and I was typing away on the computer when all of a sudden I heard someone very loudly say, "Oh my god, what?" This employee proceeds to go into a conference room so that their voice is muffled, but they scream again and loudly say, "Well, did they recover the body?" I hear rustling from around my cube, and same employee talks to their boss, wishes them a happy Memorial Day weekend, and that they gotta leave early. This employee proceeds to wish me and a few other of my coworkers a cheery happy Memorial Day weekend, and leaves. My mind races thinking I'm going to have to report said employee for being an accomplice to murder or something, but a few minutes later, from my cube, I overhear a couple of other employees talk about how said employee had to leave because one of their friends who was visiting had fallen into the Grand Canyon. Later at lunch, I'm talking with my coworkers about the situation when my coworker casually says, "Oh yeah, my uncle died the same way." She goes further to explain that her family was from a different country and that whenever she talks to her mom, who lives in a different country, about going hiking at the Grand Canyon, her mom always says, "Why are you so fascinated by the hole in the ground where your uncle died?" A few other weird things happened while I was working at that same company, including me having to do a more intense background check on someone because they had the same name as someone on a wanted list of some sort, and a weird older guy creeping on the interns. I've seen a few comments and hear from people who weren't necessarily in ours, but who were in charge of hiring, so I figured I'd share my weirdest story. I was conducting an interview with a candidate who had previously worked for 5 years as a science teacher. I work in pharma, so I was curious as to why he was leaving his current position, and without skipping a beat, he started going into the legal troubles he was facing. I immediately tried to stop him from going into details, since it could cause legal issues for us, particularly if we chose not to hire. He pressed on telling me that he was being accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a student and that he was on leave from his current school. I had to end the interview and excuse myself from the room. I couldn't believe how open he was in telling me that he was, allegedly, banging an underage student. I'm not sure if this is weird, but it sure as hell was disrespectful and was quite a WTF moment for me. I was supposed to conduct an interview with an applicant, and I make it a habit to drop them a text 2 hours before the interview to remind them about the interview. This applicant came 30 minutes past his interview slot, and in that 30 minutes I was calling him and texting him to check his ETA, and all he said was "He's on the way." At the 30-minute mark I called him again while standing outside of the office building, and there he was smoking a cigarette. He turned to me, gestured at his cigarette, scowled at me, and gestured for me to wait. He didn't get the job, and when we sent him the rejection email he got upset and sent me a rude email, then proceeded to block my number. Joys of being in ours, I guess. Oh my, you watched until the end? That's fucking awesome, dude. Thanks for watching.